I woke up to find a bright orange envelope taped to my front door, and I knew immediately it was going to ruin my day. The Phoenix sun was already baking the pavement at 7 in the morning, and my new solar panels were doing exactly what I'd paid $12,000 for them to do, converting that relentless Arizona heat into cold, hard energy savings. But apparently, someone had a problem with that. I pulled the envelope off, leaving a sticky residue on the wood, and ripped it open. The letterhead read Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association in an obnoxiously formal script. My stomach dropped as I scanned the contents. Dear Mr. Victor Davidson, it has come to our attention that you have installed solar panel arrays on your residential property without proper approval from the HOA Architectural Review Committee. This constitutes a violation of Sunset Ridge CC and Articles Section 4.7 regarding unauthorized exterior modifications. You have 14 days to remove the installation or face daily fines of $100 per day, plus potential legal action. Sincerely, Patricia Hollingsworth, HOA President. I stood there in my doorway, still in my pajama pants, reading the letter 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Patricia Hollingsworth. Of course it was her. The woman had made it her life's mission to terrorize every homeowner in our subdivision since she'd been elected president 2 years ago. I'd watched her cite people for having the wrong shade of beige paint, for leaving their garbage cans out 20 minutes too long, for planting flowers that weren't on the approved list. But this was different. This was my investment, my property, and more importantly, this was protected by Arizona state law. I'd done my homework before installing those panels. Arizona's Solar Rights Act was crystal clear. HOAs cannot prohibit solar panel installations. They can set reasonable restrictions about placement and appearance, but they absolutely cannot ban them outright or make the process so difficult that it becomes a de facto prohibition. I'd even had my solar company, Sun Bright Energy Solutions, review all the relevant statutes before we started the installation. I pulled out my phone and called Jake Morrison, the sales rep who'd handled my installation. He answered on the 3rd ring. Victor, hey man, what's up? I just got slapped with a violation notice from my HOA. They're saying I need approval and threatening to fine me $100 a day. There was a pause, then Jake let out a low whistle. Yeah, we get this sometimes. They're bluffing. Arizona Revised Statute 3318-16 protects you. HOAs can't prohibit solar installations in Arizona, period. Can you send me the exact statute language? I need to respond to this. Absolutely. I'll email you everything right now. And Victor, don't back down. These HOA types count on people not knowing their rights. You've got the law completely on your side. I thanked him and went inside, my coffee now cold and my morning thoroughly derailed. My wife Sarah had already left for work at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, and I was grateful she hadn't seen the notice. She'd been worried about potential HOA pushback from the beginning, and I'd assured her it wouldn't be an issue because we had legal protection. Now I had to make sure I was right. My phone buzzed with Jake's email. He'd sent me a comprehensive packet, the full text of Arizona's Solar Rights Act, case law from previous HOA disputes, and a template response letter. I spent the next 2 hours at my kitchen table, drafting a response that was professional but firm. By noon, I had my letter ready. I detailed Arizona Revised Statute 3318-16, which explicitly states that HOAs cannot prohibit solar panel installation or require approval that would effectively prevent installation. I cited the legislative intent behind the law, which was to promote renewable energy adoption across the state. I noted that my installation met all county building codes and had been properly permitted through Maricopa County. And I concluded by requesting that the violation notice be withdrawn immediately. I printed it, signed it, and drove to the HOA management office on the other side of our subdivision. Sunset Ridge was one of those massive Phoenix developments that had sprung up in the early 2000s, with over 800 homes spread across a grid of streets with names like Desert Bloom Drive and Cactus Flower Court. The HOA office was tucked into a small commercial plaza near the community center. Inside, a woman in her 20s sat behind a desk, looking bored as she scrolled through her phone. Her nameplate read Jennifer Martinez, Office Administrator. "Hi, I need to submit a formal response to a violation notice," I said, holding up my letter. She took it without much interest, stamped it with a received date, and tossed it into a wire basket overflowing with papers. "The board meets next Thursday at 7. You can come present your case if you want. I'd like to speak with Patricia Hollingsworth directly." Jennifer's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of sympathy crossing her face. "She's not in today, but honestly, you should just come to the board meeting. Patricia doesn't really do one-on-one meetings." I thanked her and left, feeling like I'd just put a message in a bottle and tossed it into the ocean. But at least I'd responded within the required time frame. Now I had to wait. The next 5 days passed slowly. I kept checking my mailbox, expecting either a response or another violation notice. Nothing came. Meanwhile, my solar panels hummed along beautifully, and my first electric bill arrived showing a credit of $47. The system was working even better than projected. On Wednesday afternoon, I finally got a response, but not the kind I'd expected. Another orange envelope, hand-delivered to my door. This time, the letter was shorter and significantly more aggressive. "Mr. Davidson, your response has been reviewed and denied. The HOA maintains that Section 4.7 of our CC and Articles requires architectural approval for all exterior modifications, including solar installations. Arizona state law does not supersede private contractual agreements between homeowners and their associations. Your 14-day removal period remains in effect. Failure to comply will result in immediate fines and potential legal action. Patricia Hollingsworth, HOA President." I felt my blood pressure spike as I read it. This woman was either completely ignorant of the law or intentionally trying to bully me into submission. Either way, I wasn't backing down. I called Jake again. "They're doubling down," I told him. "Saying their CC and Articles trump state law." Jake laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "That's legally insane. State law absolutely supersedes HOA rules when there's a conflict. That's basic constitutional hierarchy. Victor, I think you need to talk to a lawyer. We've got a few we work with who specialize in this stuff. Can I have one call you?" "Yeah, do it." 20 minutes later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Brennan and Associates, attorneys at law. "Mr. Davidson, this is Richard Brennan. Jake Morrison asked me to give you a call. I understand you're having some HOA trouble over your solar installation." I explained the situation, reading him both letters verbatim. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he let out a long sigh. "Okay, this is straightforward but probably going to be unpleasant. Your HOA president is flat out wrong. Arizona law is very clear on this issue. But people like her don't back down easy, and HOA boards have insurance that covers legal defense, so they can afford to be stubborn even when they're losing. What do I need to do? First, attend that board meeting tomorrow. Be calm, be professional, cite the statute again. Bring printed copies for each board member. Sometimes when you put it in front of the whole board, the reasonable members will overrule the crazy president. If that doesn't work, I'll send them a formal legal demand letter. That usually does the trick. And if that doesn't work, we file suit. But it shouldn't get that far. What would a lawsuit cost me? Honestly, probably nothing. In these cases, the prevailing party usually recovers attorney fees, and you'd be the prevailing party. The law is unambiguous. But it takes time and stress, which is why I'm hoping they see reason before we get there. I agreed to his approach and spent the evening preparing for the board meeting. I printed out copies of the Arizona Solar Rights Act, highlighted the relevant passages, and put together a simple one-page summary of why the violation notice was legally unsupportable. Sarah came home around 8, and I filled her in over dinner. "I knew this would happen," she said, stabbing at her salad with more force than necessary. "Patricia Hollingsworth has been a nightmare since we moved in. Remember when she tried to fine the Johnsons for having a basketball hoop? This is different. We've got state law backing us up." "I hope you're right. But Victor, maybe we should just take them down. Is it worth the fight?" I looked at her, genuinely shocked. "Sarah, we paid $12,000 for those panels. They're saving us money every single month. And we're doing the right thing for the environment. Why should we let some power-hungry HOA president bully us into removing them when the law is completely on our side?" She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "You're right. I'm just tired of conflict. The hospital has been crazy, and I guess I'm letting that bleed over. Go to the meeting tomorrow. Stand your ground." Thursday evening, I walked into the Sunset Ridge Community Center at 6:45, carrying my folder of documents and trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of folding chairs facing them. About 20 homeowners were scattered throughout the seats, most looking as thrilled to be there as I felt. Patricia Hollingsworth arrived at 6:58, sweeping in like she owned the place. She was exactly what you'd picture. Mid-50s, blonde hair teased into a helmet, expensive athleisure where that had never seen actual exercise, and a pinched expression like she'd been sucking on lemons. She was followed by 4 other board members who all looked significantly less enthusiastic about being there. The meeting started with standard HOA business: approval of last month's minutes, treasurer's report, discussion of landscaping contracts. I sat through 45 minutes of mind-numbing minutiae before Patricia finally said, "New business. We have a violation appeal from Mr. Victor Davidson regarding unauthorized solar panel installation." I stood up, folder in hand. "Thank you for hearing me out. I'm here to discuss the violation notice I received regarding my solar panels. I believe there's been a misunderstanding about Arizona state law." Patricia cut me off. "Mr. Davidson, there's no misunderstanding. You installed a major exterior modification without submitting plans to the Architectural Review Committee. That's a clear violation of our CC and RTCS. This isn't complicated. With respect, Mrs. Hollingsworth, Arizona Revised Statute 33-18-16 specifically prohibits HOAs from banning solar panel installations or creating approval processes that effectively prevent them. I have copies of the statute for each board member." I walked up and distributed my documents. Most of the board members actually looked at them with interest. Patricia took hers and set it down without glancing at it. "State law doesn't override private contracts," she said dismissively. "When you bought your home, you agreed to abide by our CC and RTCS. That includes getting approval for modifications." One of the other board members, a man in his 60s with silver hair, raised his hand slightly. His nameplate identified him as Robert Chen, Vice President. Patricia, I think we should review this statute. If state law does protect solar installations, we need to know that. It doesn't matter, Patricia snapped. Our CC and Artiques are clear. Another board member, a woman named Lisa Thornton, spoke up. Actually, I remember reading something about this when Arizona passed those solar incentives. I think the state law might actually supersede HOA restrictions. Patricia's face was turning red. The CC and Artiques are a legal contract. We can't just ignore them because someone doesn't like a rule. I kept my voice calm. Mrs. Hollingsworth, I'm not asking you to ignore your CC and Artiques. I'm asking you to recognize that state law takes precedence when there's a conflict. Arizona specifically passed this law because some HOAs were preventing homeowners from installing solar panels. The legislature decided that promoting renewable energy was more important than HOA architectural control. This isn't my opinion. It's settled law. I disagree, Patricia said flatly. And as president of this board, I maintain that the violation stands. We'll put it to a vote. All in favor of upholding the violation. Patricia raised her hand. No one else did. She looked around the table, her expression darkening. All opposed, Robert, Lisa, and the other two board members all raised their hands. Patricia's jaw clenched. Fine. The violation is rescinded by board vote. But Mr. Davidson, I'm not done with this. I'll be consulting with our HOA attorney, and if he agrees with me, we'll revisit this issue. That's your right, I said evenly. And if you do, you'll find that every attorney familiar with Arizona HOA law will tell you the same thing I'm telling you now. But I appreciate the board's time. I gathered my materials and left, feeling victorious but also uneasy. Patricia Hollingsworth had not struck me as someone who accepted defeat gracefully. And I was right to be worried. The weekend passed quietly, and I thought maybe that was the end of it. The board had voted in my favor, the violation was rescinded, and my solar panels continued converting sunlight into savings. But Monday morning brought another orange envelope. This time, the violation wasn't about the solar panels themselves. It was about unsightly electrical conduit visible from the street and roof-mounted equipment creating visual blight. The fines were the same, $100 per day, starting immediately. I couldn't believe it. Patricia was trying to achieve through targeted harassment what she couldn't accomplish through direct prohibition. I took photos of my house from every angle. The conduit was a single white pipe running from the panels to my electrical panel, barely visible and standard for every solar installation. The roof-mounted equipment was the panels themselves, which were flush-mounted and professional-looking. I called Richard Brennan immediately. "She's retaliating," he said after I explained. "This is actually good for us in a legal sense, because it shows bad faith. But it's going to cost her HOA a lot of money when we're done. Are you ready to get aggressive? Send the demand letter." He had it drafted and sent by end of business that day. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. 3 pages detailing Arizona's Solar Rights Act, citing multiple court cases where HOAs had lost similar disputes, explicitly calling out the retaliatory violations as bad faith, and demanding that all violations be permanently withdrawn, and that the HOA issue a written acknowledgement of my right to maintain the solar installation. It concluded with a warning that if the HOA did not comply within 7 days, we would file suit seeking not only removal of the violations, but also damages for harassment and recovery of all attorney fees. I got a call from Robert Chen that evening. "Victor, I want you to know that most of the board is on your side. Patricia did this without board approval. She's claiming she has authority to issue violations as president, but several of us think she's way out of line. We've called an emergency meeting for tomorrow night. I appreciate you letting me know. Just be aware that Patricia is talking about hiring a lawyer to fight this. She's convinced she's right, and she's not backing down. The emergency board meeting was even more contentious than the first. I attended as an observer, sitting in the back row while the board argued. Patricia had indeed consulted with an attorney, but unfortunately for her, he'd apparently told her exactly what I'd been saying. She presented his written opinion to the board, and I watched Robert Chen read it aloud. According to our attorney, Mr. James Webster, Arizona Revised Statute 33-1816 does appear to protect solar panel installations from HOA prohibition. However, he notes that HOAs may still enforce reasonable aesthetic restrictions. He recommends that the board work with Mr. Davidson to address any legitimate aesthetic concerns rather than pursuing violation proceedings. Patricia practically vibrated with anger. The panels are ugly. They ruin the neighborhood's aesthetic. That's a legitimate concern. Lisa Thornton shook her head. Half the houses in this subdivision have solar panels, Patricia. This isn't new. Why are you targeting Victor's specifically? Because he didn't get approval. Because you would have denied approval, Robert said quietly. Patricia, our own attorney is telling us to back off. We need to withdraw all violations related to Victor Davidson's solar installation. If we don't, he's going to sue us and we're going to lose. And then the HOA will be on the hook for his legal fees. Is that what you want? The vote was 4-1 to withdraw all violations and issue a written acknowledgement of my right to maintain the solar panels. Patricia was the lone dissent, and she stormed out of the meeting before it was even officially adjourned. I received the official letter from the HOA 2 days later, signed by Robert Chen as vice president, stating that all violations had been withdrawn and that my solar installation was in compliance with both HOA rules and Arizona state law. I thought that was finally the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I came home from grocery shopping to find that someone had spray-painted eyesore across my garage door in red paint. Sarah discovered it first and was on the phone with the police when I pulled into the driveway. The responding officer, a young guy named Officer Martinez, took photos and filed a report. Any idea who might have done this? I explained the whole HOA situation, including Patricia's vendetta against my solar panels. He wrote everything down but looked skeptical. I mean, it could be related, but we'd need proof. You got security cameras? No, but I'm installing them today. I meant it. Within hours, I had ordered a comprehensive home security system with multiple cameras covering every angle of my property. The system arrived 2 days later, and I spent a Saturday installing cameras on all 4 corners of my house. One pointing at the driveway, one at the front door, one at the backyard, and one covering the side gate. The garage door cleaning and repainting cost me $400. I submitted a claim with my homeowner's insurance, but my deductible was $500, so I ate the cost. Sarah was increasingly stressed about the whole situation, and I couldn't blame her. What had started as a simple violation notice had escalated into property vandalism. Nothing happened for a month. The security cameras recorded birds, delivery drivers, and occasionally the neighbor's cat, but no more vandalism. I started to think maybe the spray paint incident had been random, unconnected to the HOA drama. My solar panels continued to work beautifully. My electric bills remained gloriously low, and life seemed to be returning to normal. Then I got a notice from the county. It was from Maricopa County Code Compliance. stating that they'd received a complaint about unpermitted construction at my address, and that an inspector would be visiting to verify that all work had been properly permitted. I pulled out my solar installation file, which included a copy of the county building permit that Sun Bright Energy Solutions had pulled before installation. Everything was in order, but someone had sixed the county on me. When the inspector arrived, a tired-looking woman in her 40s named Susan Clark, I had all my documentation ready. She spent 20 minutes examining my solar installation, reviewing my permits, and checking that everything matched the approved plans. "You're completely fine," she finally said. "Whoever filed this complaint wasted my time and yours. Everything here is properly permitted and up to code." "Can I ask who filed the complaint?" It was anonymous. "But between you and me, we get a lot of bogus complaints from HOAs trying to use the county to enforce their own rules." It's frustrating. After she left, I called Richard Brennan again. "This is harassment," he said immediately. "The vandalism, the bogus county complaint, all following your successful challenge to the HOA. Victor, we need to go on offense here. I want to file a formal complaint against Patricia Hollingsworth and potentially pursue a restraining order." "Can we prove it's her? The pattern is pretty clear. But you're right that we need more. Keep documenting everything. Save every email, every letter, every interaction. And those cameras you installed, make sure they're working perfectly." They were working perfectly, which is how I captured what happened next. It was a Tuesday night around 11:30. Sarah and I were already asleep when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the security system. I groggily checked the app and saw a figure in dark clothing approaching my house from the street. I watched in real time as the person walked up my driveway, looking around nervously, then approached my electrical panel on the side of the house. "Sarah, wake up. Someone's outside." We both watched on my phone as the figure opened my electrical panel and appeared to be tampering with something. I was already dialing 911 when the person suddenly stopped, looked directly at the security camera, and ran back toward the street. "911, what's your emergency?" "Someone just tried to tamper with my electrical panel. I have video footage. They ran when they saw the camera." The dispatcher kept me on the line while officers were dispatched. I went downstairs and turned on all my exterior lights, but whoever it was had already fled. 2 police cars arrived within 10 minutes, and I showed them the video footage. Even in the dark, with a hoodie partially obscuring the person's face, there were a few clear frames where you could make out features. The officers took a copy of the footage and spent 30 minutes searching the neighborhood, but found nothing. Officer Martinez, the same officer who'd responded to the vandalism report, looked at the footage carefully. "Mr. Davidson, I remember you. This is related to that HOA situation, isn't it?" "I think so, but I can't prove who that is." "Mind if I show this to a colleague? We've had some other suspicious activity reports from this neighborhood. Might be connected." "Please do." The next morning, I called my solar installer in a panic. I was terrified that whoever had tampered with my electrical panel had damaged the system or created a safety hazard. A technician came out within hours and did a complete inspection. "Everything looks okay," he said after checking all the connections. "Looks like they disconnected your solar main breaker, but that's it. Just flipped it off. I turned it back on. No damage." "Why would someone do that?" he shrugged. "Trying to make it look like your system is faulty maybe, or just messing with you. Either way, you might want to put a lock on this panel." I bought a locking electrical panel cover that same day. But more importantly, I sent the security footage to Richard Brennan, who sent it to a private investigator he sometimes worked with. The investigator enhanced the footage, isolating the clearest frames of the person's face. 3 days later, he called me with results. "Mr. Davidson, I was able to get some pretty good facial captures from your video. I ran them through some databases and compared them with social media photos. I'm 90% certain that the person in your video is Patricia Hollingsworth's son, Michael Hollingsworth. He's 23, lives with his mother, and his car was spotted on your street that night by one of your neighbor's security systems." I felt a cold certainty settle over me. Patricia had sent her own son to sabotage my solar system. This had crossed from HOA overreach into criminal activity. Richard filed a police report on my behalf, including the enhanced video footage and the investigators' findings. This time, the police took it seriously. Detective Sarah Kowalski from the Phoenix PD called me in for a formal interview, where I laid out the entire timeline. The initial violation notice, Patricia's vendetta, the vandalism, the bogus county complaint, and now the attempted sabotage. "We'll follow up with Mrs. Hollingsworth and her son," Detective Kowalski said. "This is attempted criminal damage and trespassing at minimum, but I want to be straight with you. These cases can be hard to prosecute if the defendant claims mistaken identity or has an alibi. I understand, but I want this on record. This woman has been harassing me for months because I installed legal solar panels on my own house." The detective nodded. "We'll do our job. You just keep documenting everything." 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Davidson." It was Patricia Hollingsworth, and her voice was shaking with rage. "How dare you accuse my son of vandalism? Michael would never do such a thing. You're just trying to destroy my reputation because I held you accountable for violating HOA rules." "Mrs. Hollingsworth, I have video footage of someone tampering with my electrical panel, and that person has been identified as your son. This is now a police matter. You shouldn't be calling me. You're a liar and a troublemaker. Ever since you moved into this neighborhood, you've been nothing but problems. First those hideous solar panels, now false accusations against my family. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. Are you threatening me? I'm telling you the truth. You don't belong in Sunset Ridge." I hung up and immediately called Richard Brennan to report the call. He was furious. "That's witness intimidation or tampering at minimum. Report it to Detective Kowalski immediately. And Victor, record every call from now on. Arizona is a one-party consent state, so you're legally allowed to record conversations you're part of." I reported the call, and Detective Kowalski added it to the growing file. The police interviewed Michael Hollingsworth, and according to the detective, he denied everything and claimed he was home watching movies the night of the incident. Patricia backed up his alibi, naturally, but the police didn't give up. They pulled security footage from other homes on my street and found video of Michael's car, a distinctive red Honda Civic with a dented front bumper, driving past my house around the time of the incident. They also found footage from a home 2 streets over showing Michael getting out of that car while wearing the same dark hoodie visible in my security video. With that evidence, the prosecutor's office filed charges: criminal trespassing and attempted criminal damage. Michael was arrested and released on his own recognizance pending trial. Patricia, meanwhile, became completely unhinged. She started a whisper campaign throughout the neighborhood, telling anyone who would listen that I was a troublemaker who had falsely accused her innocent son. She posted in the Sunset Ridge Facebook group, claiming I'd violated multiple HOA rules and was now harassing her family. Most people ignored her, especially since several neighbors had also installed solar panels and knew exactly what she tried to do to me, but some people believed her. I started getting dirty looks at the community mailbox. Someone left a note on my car saying, "Solar panels are ugly and so are you." Another anonymous complaint was filed with the county, this time claiming my solar installation was creating electrical interference with neighbors' Wi-Fi. The county inspector came out again, tested everything, and confirmed it was nonsense. Sarah was at her breaking point. "Victor, I can't take this anymore. Maybe we should just move." And let her win. "Sarah, we've done nothing wrong. We installed legal solar panels on our own house." Everything that's happened since then has been harassment and retaliation. If we move, she'll just do this to the next person who crosses her. I know you're right. I just hate living like this, looking over our shoulder, dealing with vandalism and police reports. This isn't what I signed up for when we bought this house. I pulled her into a hug. "I know, I'm sorry, but we're almost through this. Michael's case is going to trial in a few months. Once he's convicted, this will all calm down." I hoped I was right, but things got worse before they got better. The next escalation came from an unexpected direction. I received a letter from a law firm I'd never heard of, Hastings and Pierce, attorneys at law. They were representing the Sunset Ridge HOA in a lawsuit against me for breach of CC and Artiques, failure to maintain property in accordance with community standards, and creating a private nuisance. I read the complaint with mounting disbelief. It claimed that my solar panels were installed in violation of HOA rules, that they created glare that bothered neighbors, that they decreased property values in the community, and that my aggressive and litigious behavior had created a hostile environment. They were seeking a court order requiring me to remove the panels, plus damages of $15,000. I called Richard Brennan immediately. "They're suing me. The HOA is actually suing me." He didn't sound surprised. "Patricia must have convinced the board to authorize legal action. Or she's doing it unilaterally and claiming board authority. Either way, this is incredibly stupid on their part. Send me the complaint, and I'll draft a response. Victor, they're going to lose this lawsuit so badly that it'll become a case study in law schools. Arizona law is crystal clear. But it's going to be expensive and time-consuming. What about my attorney fees? You said I'd recover them." "You will, almost certainly, but you'll have to pay them first and then get reimbursed after we win. We're looking at probably $20,000 to $30,000 in legal fees to defend this and pursue our counterclaims." I felt sick. Even knowing I'd eventually be reimbursed, the idea of spending that much money defending my right to have solar panels was overwhelming. But I didn't have a choice. Richard filed our response, along with a comprehensive counterclaim alleging harassment, violation of Arizona's Solar Rights Act, breach of fiduciary duty by the HOA board, and abuse of process. We demanded dismissal of the HOA's claims, a permanent injunction preventing any further action against my solar installation, damages for harassment, and full recovery of attorney fees. The case was assigned to Judge Margaret Williamson in Maricopa County Superior Court. The initial hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Richard deposed Patricia Hollingsworth, and I got to sit in and watch. Patricia arrived at the deposition dressed like she was going to a country club luncheon, dripping with jewelry and condescension. Richard's office was in downtown Phoenix, a sleek modern building with glass walls and expensive furniture. We gathered in a conference room, Patricia and her attorney on one side of the table, Richard and me on the other, with a court reporter at the end capturing every word. Richard was methodical and devastating. He walked Patricia through every step of her campaign against my solar panels. The initial violation notice, the retaliatory violations after the board overruled her, the vandalism complaint, the code enforcement complaints, and finally the lawsuit. Mrs. Hollingsworth, are you aware that Arizona Revised Statute 33-1816 prohibits HOAs from banning solar panel installations? I'm aware that you claim that. It's not a claim, Mrs. Hollingsworth. It's state law. Have you read the statute? My attorney has explained the law to me. And did your attorney tell you that Arizona law specifically preempts HOA restrictions on solar installations? Her attorney, a nervous-looking man named Gregory Hastings, interrupted. Objection calls for privileged communication. Richard nodded. I'll rephrase, Mrs. Hollingsworth. Do you understand that state law takes precedence over HOA-CC and Articus when there's a conflict? I understand that you keep saying that. You believe that HOA-CC and Articus are more important than state law. Patricia leaned forward, her face flushed. I believe that homeowners who move into a planned community have a responsibility to maintain standards. Mr. Davidson's solar panels are ugly. They ruin the aesthetic of our neighborhood, and he should have followed the rules. What rules did he violate? He didn't get Architectural Review Committee approval before installation. And if he had applied for approval, would you have granted it? She hesitated. That would depend on whether the installation met our aesthetic standards. Have you ever approved a solar panel installation in Sunset Ridge? Another hesitation. I'd have to check the records. Richard slid a document across the table. This is a list of every ARC application in Sunset Ridge for the past 3 years, during your tenure as HOA president. It shows 72 applications for various modifications. 31 of those were for solar panel installations. How many did you approve? Patricia glanced at her attorney, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. I don't recall the exact number. Let me help you. 0. You denied or delayed every single solar panel application. In fact, most applicants eventually installed their panels without approval after learning about Arizona's Solar Rights Act. Isn't that correct? If homeowners chose to violate HOA rules, that's their decision. Or perhaps they knew that you were illegally preventing them from exercising their rights under state law. The deposition went on for 3 hours, and by the end, Patricia looked rattled. Her attorney kept trying to object or redirect, but Richard had done his homework. He had evidence of every violation notice she'd issued, every denial she'd made, and every instance of her attempting to prevent solar installations in the community. My deposition was scheduled for the following week, but it was far shorter and less dramatic. Patricia's attorney asked me basic questions about my installation, my knowledge of HOA rules, and my communications with the board. I answered honestly and stuck to the facts. The whole thing took less than an hour. While we waited for the court hearing, Michael Hollingsworth's criminal case moved forward. I had to testify at a preliminary hearing, where the prosecutor presented the security footage and the evidence placing Michael at my house. The judge found sufficient probable cause to proceed to trial. Patricia attended the hearing, sitting in the back row and glaring at me the entire time. When I testified about finding my electrical panel tampered with, she actually stood up and shouted, "He's lying." The judge banged his gavel. "Madam, sit down and be quiet or you'll be removed from this courtroom." She sat, but the outburst had clearly hurt Michael's case. His attorney, a public defender who looked overwhelmed, tried to argue that the video was inconclusive, but the judge wasn't buying it. Trial was set for 3 months out. Finally, our civil case hearing arrived. Judge Williamson's courtroom was old-school formal, all dark wood and serious faces. She was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. Both sides presented oral arguments on the HOA's motion for preliminary injunction and our motion to dismiss. Gregory Hastings argued that the HOA had a right to enforce its CC and Articus, and that my solar panels violated architectural standards. He claimed that Arizona's Solar Rights Act still allowed HOAs to impose reasonable aesthetic restrictions, and that requiring architectural approval was reasonable. Richard countered by walking the judge through the statute, the legislative history, and multiple cases where Arizona courts had found in favor of homeowners. He pointed out that Patricia had never approved a single solar installation, that she'd retaliated against me after the board overruled her, and that the HOA's lawsuit was nothing more than harassment. Judge Williamson listened carefully, occasionally asking questions. When both sides had finished, she didn't hesitate. "I'm granting the defendant's motion to dismiss the HOA's claims. Arizona Revised Statute 33-18-16 is unambiguous. HOAs cannot prohibit solar panel installations." While the statute allows for reasonable aesthetic restrictions, the evidence shows that this HOA has effectively prohibited all solar installations through a blanket denial policy. That's exactly what the statute was designed to prevent. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice. Patricia, sitting in the gallery, let out an audible gasp. Judge Williamson looked at her sharply. "Furthermore, I'm scheduling a hearing on the defendant's counterclaims for harassment and abuse of process. This appears to be a case of HOA overreach, and if the evidence supports the defendant's allegations, I'll be awarding damages and attorney fees. We'll reconvene in 30 days. We walked out of the courtroom, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. Richard was grinning. That went even better than I expected. Williamson is known for not tolerating HOA nonsense. In 30 days, we'll present evidence of all the harassment, and she'll award you everything you're asking for. But Patricia wasn't done fighting. 2 weeks later, the HOA filed a notice of appeal. Richard explained that they were trying to delay the inevitable, that appeals in cases like this almost never succeeded, but it would drag things out for another year or more. "Unless we can get the appeal dismissed as frivolous," he added, "which I think we can. The law is just too clear." While the appeal was pending, Michael Hollingsworth's criminal trial finally happened. I had to testify again, this time in front of a jury. The prosecutor walked me through the entire timeline, showed the jury my security footage, and presented all the evidence linking Michael to the crime. Michael's defense was weak. He claimed he'd been driving around the neighborhood that night because he couldn't sleep, and that someone must have borrowed his hoodie. The jury didn't believe him. They deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on both counts. The judge sentenced Michael to 1 year of probation, 100 hours of community service, and restitution for the cost of cleaning and repairing my garage door. Patricia sobbed in the courtroom, and Michael looked stunned. As they led him out to process the probation paperwork, Patricia turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You've destroyed my son's life over your precious solar panels." "Your son destroyed his own life when he committed a crime," I said quietly. "And you encouraged him. That's on you, not me." Security had to escort Patricia out of the courthouse because she wouldn't stop yelling. I felt bad for Michael in a way. He'd clearly been manipulated by his mother into doing something stupid. But actions have consequences, and he was an adult who'd made his own choices. The criminal conviction turned out to be the turning point we needed. With Michael convicted, the evidence of harassment became undeniable. The HOA's attorney filed a motion to withdraw from the appeal, citing irreconcilable differences with the client. Judge Williamson granted it, and the HOA was left scrambling to find new representation. No reputable law firm wanted to touch the case. The facts were bad, the law was against them, and Patricia's behavior had made her radioactive. Eventually, the appeal was dismissed for failure to prosecute after the HOA missed multiple filing deadlines. We went back before Judge Williamson for the hearing on my counterclaims. Richard presented a comprehensive timeline of harassment. The initial violation notices, the retaliatory violations, the vandalism, the bogus county complaints, Patricia's threatening phone call, and finally, the frivolous lawsuit. He presented evidence that the HOA board had not actually authorized the lawsuit, that Patricia had acted unilaterally and forged board authorization documents. That last part was damning. Judge Williamson's expression turned thunderous as Richard presented emails showing that Patricia had never called a board vote on authorizing the lawsuit, had instead simply told the attorney that the board approved it, and had used HOA funds to pay for the litigation without board knowledge. "This is fraud," Judge Williamson said. "Mrs. Hollingsworth, you've misappropriated HOA funds, forged authorization documents, and pursued a frivolous lawsuit against a homeowner who was exercising his legal rights. I'm awarding the defendant full damages for harassment in the amount of $25,000, attorney fees in the amount of $32,000, and I'm issuing a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from taking any action against the defendant's solar installation. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the Arizona Attorney General's office for potential prosecution." Patricia's face went white. The HOA's interim attorney, a younger woman who'd taken over the case just 2 weeks earlier, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Judge Williamson wasn't done. "I'm also ordering that Mrs. Hollingsworth be immediately removed as HOA president, and that she be personally liable for all damages and attorney fees awarded today. The HOA itself bears no responsibility for her illegal actions. Mrs. Hollingsworth, you've abused your position, violated state law, and harassed a homeowner for exercising his legal rights. I hope this serves as a lesson." The courtroom was silent. I felt vindicated and exhausted all at once. After more than 8 months of fighting, it was finally over. The fallout was swift and severe. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and formally removed Patricia as president. Robert Chen took over as acting president and immediately issued a community-wide email apologizing for Patricia's actions and affirming that solar installations were fully permitted and protected under Arizona law. The board also voted to pursue legal action against Patricia to recover the money she'd misappropriated. Patricia tried to rally support in the community, posting long screeds on Facebook about how she'd been persecuted for trying to maintain standards. Almost no one supported her. Most homeowners were horrified by what she'd done and glad to see her gone. A few of her die-hard supporters stuck by her, but they were a tiny minority. The Arizona Attorney General's office did investigate and eventually filed charges against Patricia for fraud and misappropriation of HOA funds. That case was still pending months later, but her attorney was reportedly negotiating a plea deal. As for me and Sarah, life slowly returned to normal. The HOA sent me a check for $57,000 covering damages, attorney fees, and costs. My solar panels continued to work beautifully, saving us over $100 a month on electricity. Several neighbors who'd been on the fence about solar decided to install their own panels, and the new HOA board under Robert's leadership processed their applications within days. Sarah and I even started to enjoy living in Sunset Ridge again. Without Patricia's toxic presence, the The community felt friendlier and more relaxed. The new board focused on actual community improvement rather than nitpicking violations, and property values actually increased. One evening about a year after the whole thing started, I was outside checking on my solar panels when my neighbor Tom walked over. He'd recently installed his own panels and wanted to thank me. "Victor, I just wanted to say that what you did took real courage. A lot of people would have backed down when Patricia started her campaign. But you stood your ground, and now the rest of us can enjoy solar power without harassment. So thank you." I shook his hand. "I just did what was right, and honestly I had the law on my side. That made all the difference. Still, it couldn't have been easy, but I'm glad you fought. This neighborhood is better for it." As I watched the sun set over the desert, my solar panels soaking up the last rays of light and converting them into clean energy, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I'd stood up to a bully, protected my rights, and helped establish a precedent that would protect other homeowners in the future. The fight had been exhausting, expensive, and at times frightening, but it had been worth it. Patricia eventually moved out of Sunset Ridge. Rumor had it she'd accepted a plea deal that included restitution and probation, but no jail time. Michael finished his probation and apparently moved to Tucson for a fresh start. I never saw either of them again, and I was fine with that. The permanent injunction Judge Williamson issued was recorded with the county and became part of the HOA's official documents. Any future buyer of my home would know that the solar installation was legally protected and could not be challenged. The HOA also amended its CC and Articles to explicitly acknowledge Arizona's Solar Rights Act and streamline the ARC approval process for solar installations to be purely administrative rather than substantive. Richard Brennan used the case as an example in presentations he gave to other attorneys about HOA law. Apparently, judges across Arizona were citing Judge Williamson's ruling in similar cases, making it even harder for HOAs to interfere with solar installations. In a small way, my fight had helped change the landscape for homeowners throughout the state. Sarah and I celebrated our victory with a weekend trip to Sedona, staying at a nice resort and finally relaxing without the constant stress of HOA drama hanging over us. On our last evening there, sitting on our balcony watching the red rocks glow in the sunset, Sarah took my hand. "I'm sorry I doubted you," she said. "When this all started, I just wanted you to take the panels down and avoid the conflict. But you were right. Some things are worth fighting for." "We fought for it together," I told her. "I couldn't have done it without your support even when you were scared, and you had every right to be scared. Patricia was unhinged, she was, but she lost, and we won. And now we have solar panels and $100 a month electric bill and a crazy story to tell at parties." I laughed. "There is that, though I'm not sure I want to relive it at parties." "Fair enough. But Victor, I'm proud of you. You stood up for what was right even when it was hard." That matters. We flew home the next day, and life continued. My solar panels kept humming along, producing clean energy and saving money. The HOA continued to function, now under competent and reasonable leadership. The community thrived without Patricia's paranoid micromanagement. I eventually recouped all my legal expenses from the settlement, and even had money left over, which we used to install a battery backup system for our solar array. Now we had power even during outages, and our energy independence was complete. Several neighbors followed suit, and Sunset Ridge became known as one of the more environmentally conscious communities in the Phoenix area. Years later, when people asked me about the solar panels on my roof, I'd tell them the story. Most were shocked that an HOA had tried so hard to prevent something that was clearly legal and beneficial. but those who dealt with difficult HOAs understood immediately. There's something about the power that comes with an HOA board position that brings out the worst in certain people. Patricia was an extreme example, but she wasn't unique. The experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, know your rights. If I hadn't researched Arizona's Solar Rights Act before installing my panels, I might have been intimidated into backing down. Second, document everything. The paper trail and video evidence were crucial in proving my case. Third, don't back down from bullies. Patricia counted on me being too tired or too scared to fight back. When I stood my ground, her entire campaign collapsed. And finally, good legal help is worth every penny. Richard Brennan's expertise and determination were essential to achieving the outcome we did. I also learned that communities are stronger when they stand up to petty tyrants. Patricia had terrorized Sunset Ridge for years, and no one had effectively challenged her until our solar panel dispute. Once she was removed, the entire community benefited. People felt freer to make reasonable improvements to their homes. The board focused on legitimate community needs rather than manufactured violations, and neighbor relations improved dramatically. The solar panels themselves became a symbol of that victory. Every time I looked at them, I remembered not just the financial savings or environmental benefits, but the principle we'd fought for: the right of homeowners to make legal improvements to their own property without unreasonable interference. It was a small battle in the grand scheme of things, but it mattered to me, to Sarah, and to every other homeowner in Sunset Ridge who wanted to embrace renewable energy. As I write this, 5 years after that first orange envelope appeared on my door, my solar panels are still going strong. They've paid for themselves twice over in energy savings. The HOA has approved over 200 solar installations in Sunset Ridge, making us one of the most solar-friendly communities in Arizona. Property values have increased, partly because buyers are attracted to the low energy costs and environmental consciousness. And Patricia Hollingsworth is nothing but an unpleasant memory, a cautionary tale about what happens when small-minded people get a little bit of power and use it to harass rather than serve. I sometimes wonder if Patricia ever realized how wrong she was. Probably not. People like that rarely do. But it doesn't matter anymore. She lost, the law prevailed, and homeowners throughout Arizona have an easier time installing solar panels because of the precedent our case helped establish. That's a legacy I can feel good about. On sunny Arizona days, when my panels are producing maximum power, and my electric meter is literally running backward as I feed excess energy back into the grid, I smile. Not just because of the money I'm saving or the carbon emissions I'm preventing, but because those panels represent something bigger. They represent the rule of law over arbitrary authority, the right of individuals to make their own choices, and the power of standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. They're more than solar panels. They're a monument to the idea that bullies don't always win, that justice can prevail, and that sometimes the fight is worth it. And every time a new neighbor installs solar panels, I make a point of welcoming them to the club. I let them know that the HOA is supportive, that the process is straightforward, and that they're making a great choice. I don't usually tell them the full story of what it took to make that possible unless they ask. But when they do ask, when they want to know why Sunset Ridge is so solar-friendly when other Phoenix HOAs are still fighting installations, I tell them everything. I tell them about Patricia, about the violations and the harassment, about the legal battle and the eventual victory. And I tell them that their panels, like mine, are protected not just by Arizona law, but by hard-won precedent. The fight to install my solar panels and defend them against HOA overreach was one of the most stressful experiences of my life, but it was also one of the most meaningful. It taught me that individual actions matter, that standing up to injustice makes a difference, and that the law, when properly applied, protects the rights of ordinary people against those who would abuse authority. My solar panels will keep producing clean energy for another 20 years at least. And for every single day of those 20 years, they'll remind me that I fought for what was right and won.